Can everyone hear me all right? Is that a good volume? Cool. All right. Hello everyone. I'm Matthew. I'm at Gurus, and yeah, this is I've been going to Web Meetup for I think nearly the beginning of time really. So this is actually my first time doing a talk here, which is I've always been saying I'll do a talk, and it says only just now. So you have to be a bit patient with me. But if you do have any feedback on how I can improve my delivery, I'm definitely would like that at the end of the talk. That'd be great. So yeah, I'm going to be doing a talk on accelerating code evolution, transforming your code base with TS Morph and ChatGPT. It's quite a bit of a mouthful talk, but yeah, we're going to be looking into that. What the talk is in kind of two parts. So we're going to be looking at kind of code transformation at the beginning of it, and then the second part we're going to be probably looking at kind of the AI stuff and empowering that really. So the first thing I want to talk about really is a code base is like a garden. I really like this phrase. Kind of, it's a great way to describe someone, what the code base is for someone who's not technical. So can get a lot of different similarities. If you've read the programmatic program, they often describe as programming. It's more like gardening. So, maybe you've just moved into a new house, you've got a new garden, you've got new plants, you design all the flower beds, you put all the plants in, these like new features, everything's done. And anyone who has a garden will probably know immediately it doesn't stay like that. It's continuous maintenance. You need to make sure you're keeping the lawn, getting rid of all the weeds, patching the fence, security updates and stuff. You can kind of see those analogies there. If you look throughout my presentation, all the imagery in this is generated by AI. So here I've asked AI to create an imagery of a overgrown garden versus a nice garden. Anyone's ever played around with the image stuff? It's really difficult to get AI to create like ugly looking pictures. Everything's Instagram perfect, so you kind of get two extremes. You can't have an overgrown garden. I asked overgrown garden, it was all a perfect overgrown garden. And I was like, so you have to go like post-apocalyptic, nuclear event garden, and that's managed to get what I got on that photo. But yes, so what this talk is going to be kind of really focusing on is kind of maintaining your garden, essentially. And a part of that is, updating third-party dependencies. So in Codebase, Codebase, we're highly dependent on Angular, and part of that is kind of upgrading, maintaining lots of our libraries, one of them being Angular. And we do this for new features that are coming out in these frameworks. Maybe it's React or Vue. So the new features, improved performance that we get from upgrading, and security as well. It's a big factor really, making sure that our products haven't got any security vulnerabilities, so we're always maintaining our garden. We're fixing the holes in the fence, if you will, for security and all that stuff, kind of things. So that's kind of what I want to focus on. So let's get an example of this. So again, about a year ago, we recently upgraded to Angular 14, and as part of the Angular 14 upgrade, they introduced this new inject function. I'm not going into detail and technical of what this does specifically, but essentially we had the kind of the old way. So we have our components. So just using a basic my component here, and we're injecting a HTTP client in. So maybe our component wants to do a HTTP call of some sort. And what they've done is they recently changed the syntax. So it's now just using this new inject method. Cool. That's a little change. So why switch? Because it's it's optional whether you want to switch over to it. And really, you could argue maybe it's simpler, less code, maybe a bit easier to read. And another kind of reason why we wanted to switch over was it kind of risk of forgetting to do the import. Sometimes I accidentally removed one of these by accident. That code went out and it caused a bit of a defect. Annoyingly, there was no unit tests around that, but should have really picked it up. But switching to that is less likely to cause logs, because that would have actually created a build error. So one of the reasons why we want to switch over to it. And the other thing is really kind of matching industry standards. So, we're getting new recruits coming into the code base, and we want to be able to onboard them as quickly as possible. And we want, if they're learning Angular in maybe a different company, or they're reading the documentation, it's a lot easier for them to go straight into the code and start, delivering value if they're not having to learn our specific way of how we do injection. They're just using this. We're just doing the standard way, the industry standard way. And then eventually, Angular is going to possibly remove the old way of doing it. So we don't really want to be caught out. Maybe there's a security update coming out, the new thing, we need to upgrade immediately. Oh no, we need to do this whole injection thing, it's a blocker. We want to be a bit ahead of the game with this, so it's good to get it out before it's a bit too late, really. So what's the issue? It's just quite simple, really. You just need to go and find the old code and just update it, right? Well, when you've got a large code base, we at Codebase we always say we've got a platform, we've got a code base that is about over 20 years old now, and we're continuously maintaining it. We're not creating new projects, completely new, rewriting everything every year. It's the same code, just being evolved. And so just having a quick look over the code, we had about 4,000 usages of this code, and it's like, okay, well, let's do some quick maths. So let's say it takes me 30 seconds to do each one, about 4,000 is about 7.5 hours a day. Okay, so if I non-stop like a machine, I could probably do it about in a week, but I think I'd probably die in the process. And so, realistically, with meetings and all the other stuff that we've got during the day, it's going to be maybe a week or two or maybe 3, and then it's, well, that's kind of hard to justify to the business. I go to the business and say, hey, can I take 3 weeks out to move this injection thing? And they're going to be like, so what impact does that have to the user? Well, nothing. Does that improve code? Barely. It's a struggle, really. And so, but it's one of these things that we all want to kind of do at some point, but it's just being able to fit that in. So, maybe we could plow on, we could be, try and rush in, we've got the angry boss here. You can always tell that AI's created these images, by the way, because you've got this clock here. I don't know what multiverse time that we've got, but anytime you've got text in AI, it's just crazy. The danger of just doing it manually is, humans actually make mistakes. And with over 4,000 usages, the chances are pretty much guarantee that we're going to be making a mistake. And I don't know any developers who are really jumping up to do this kind of work. Code monkey, I'm going to do this change for 2 weeks straight is not something that appeal a lot of developers. So is there a better way of doing it? How else can we look at this? So let's get a computer to do it. Computers are very good at doing tedious things very quickly and very efficiently and very accurately. So let's just get the computer to do it. So let's have a little bit of code. So we've got our old code, and we want to transform that into our new code. We're going a bit interactive here. Any got any suggestions? Hands up. How if you were given this particular problem, just exactly how would you do it? What's the first thing you do?
Control F.
Control F, yeah? Yeah. So find and replace, essentially, yeah? So pretty much, find and replace, simple. So up here, I've got a little node application. So I'm just reading the contents of my file, my component.ts, and then I'm going to essentially find this bit of text, HTTP client, and I'm going to replace it with this new way of doing it. And then here I'm just performing the replace here and then writing the file. Okay, easy as that. Well, hang on a second. It's not just HTTP client. It's all sorts of different other services that we have. Maybe it's a router service or anything else. So we can go a bit clever with this, or we'll switch it to regex. I'll crack out the regex book again because I've forgotten all the different weird symbols. But here, I'm using regex variables, and I'm doing that in replacement. And that works, and that's great. Cool. It's getting a little bit more complicated. I don't think I quite know what that does immediately, but it's good. But then we've got constructed with 2 servers. Okay, well, it's getting a bit more complicated now. So maybe we can be a bit clever about this. We can split on the comma, and maybe we can kind of write something. And oh no, it's getting a little bit crazy now. So you can kind of follow through it and just but then we find another use case and go, actually, well, what if they put it on 2 lines, or our code here is, it's only splitting on. It's not actually looking at new lines. It's assuming there's spaces. Okay, we'll have to update the code. And then someone's, it's put an extra comma here. So we need to, I need to check for that. And you start going into madness, really. And eventually you get essentially a code that's just impossible to debug or understand what you're doing. And this is not quite the right way of doing it. So let's have a look. Is there a better way to do it? How do you do like compilers and stuff use that? So how's a better way of transforming? We're going to use essentially using abstract syntax tree. So an AST essentially is it analyzes your code and it converts that into like a tree-shaped object that allows you to kind of iterate and edit. So it's a bit like the DOM is for HTML, kind of. So that's kind of a simple way of doing it. And so we can see it as an example here. So if I go over to, this is like a viewer for being able to see, debug these kind of things. So here I've got an array, and so what I can do is I can see on the right, I've got a variable declaration, which is my tips, and then I've got an array, and I've got an array expression, and I've got the literal. So what it's done is converted that into an object tree, and we can essentially iterate over that and edit these values without having to worry about, different line endings or strings or something like that, and we're not worried about malforming code because this is just all strict objects, and we've got essentially a compiler that's interpreted that. As true, good old-fashioned, I have forgotten to make it a new link, so it's actually it should have made a new tab. Where we are. Cool. So that's just a quick overview of using ASTs or an abstract syntax tree. So what other tools out there you can use an AST? So you might be familiar, TypeScript, Babel, PostCSS, PostHTML. So all these tools will use under the hood. So they basically get your source code. So let's say you're saying you're using the new CSS, nested CSS in your code. So you want to use the latest CSS stuff, but you want to your CSS to still work in older browsers. Maybe you're still supporting IE for some crazy reason, and so you'd use PostCSS, and that converts that into that syntax tree essentially, and then it will then process that and then pump that out into your traditional old not nested way of doing CSS. And the same thing goes for TypeScript converting to JavaScript, all these kind of very similar transpilers. So how does that help us really? So we're going to break it down super simple. We've got our plain text, which is my component. We're going to convert that into an abstract syntax tree. And then what we can do is then go over that tree and make those changes. And then once we've done that change, we can then convert that back to plain text, and then we've kind of completed the transition. So what does the code look like now? So prepare for insanity. So here I'm just using TypeScript because that's what our code base is in. So this is absolutely impossible to read. So don't worry if this scares you. It scares me too. And so essentially, very, very basically, we have it's looping through all the nodes in the tree. It checks if the node is a class. Okay, we found our my component, and then we go and check if, go through each block of the class, so the methods. Is it a constructor? Yep. And then find the body of the constructor and go through each statement and just all the crazy logic there. I'm going to post all the code in here if you really want to be madness and read all this. But this is arguably as complicated as the other solution. Yes, it's probably more technically correct, but I would I definitely would struggle to read that after 3 or 4 coffees. So yeah, not very readable at all. So is there a better way we can do this? So introducing something like TS Morph. So TS Morph is kind of solving this problem. So it's basically making the TypeScript transformation a lot simpler to consume. It's still a little bit crazy, but we'll have a look at that. So it's just a wrapper around TypeScript to make the API a little bit more easier to use and integrate. So what does that look like? So let's just refresh ourselves. We've got our my components, so that's our input that we're giving it. And here again, it's still a little bit, it's a complex thing, but it's a lot easier to read. So we can see here, we're generating our tree essentially here, and then we can ask the tree, can we get all the classes that are in that file? And then we are essentially, let me scroll down. We're going to get the constructor for that class, and then we can go through the different lines, and then we're trying to find the this.http within the constructor, and then we're going to find the parameter that's in the constructor to match that up, marry that up, and then we're just creating the property for that. So this is a way we were allowed to essentially get the TS Morph to essentially run through all our source code and apply this transformation, and then it will output that source code. So we're able to transform our old code into new code, and then, yeah, so that's pretty much. So I guess the question you're probably asking, does it work? Yes, it does work. And it works really well, actually. So how long did it take to run? So it took about 10 seconds to do about 1,000 injects. That's on my old computer, so it might performance may differ. So about a minute to do the entire code base. So compare that to 2-3 weeks of sort of manually doing it. That's so much more satisfying, especially as a developer. I definitely find more fun doing these more technical challenges than having to be code monkeying through it all. So yeah, I'm going to do a bit of a conclusion. So just a bit of wrap up. So what we've learned so far in the talk. So we've learned that our code base is a bit like a garden. It's something that we want to maintain. It's not realistic for humans to do these type of tasks. We've kind of had a quick overview of just what AST is and the transformation of source codes, and a kind of quick introduction of the TypeScript while I'm doing it, how TS Morph is a much more friendly approach in how we can do our kind of code migrations. And, we can apply this for lots of different techniques. I'll just show you quite a simple one today. But, going forward, if we're doing other code migrations, it's something we're looking to do more. And then, just kind of the power of doing it for, especially when you've got a very large code base, be able to transform that. But the reason why the conclusion is midway through the talk. So it's all great, Matthew. We covered some lots of cool things, how we can do transformations and stuff. But did it actually work? Did you actually find all usages? It was 4,000. Really? Are you saying it just worked perfectly? And the answer is no. It missed about 80. I think it's one of these things where you're just like, well, I could probably go through those 80 different edge cases, but reality is that I kind of expect, if I can do 99% of the work, I'm happy to do 80 manually. And those 80 were very weird, wonderful magic that probably definitely needed a second look, really, to look over. Oh, and I guess it's one of the nice things about using TS Morph is it crashes when it doesn't see something it knows, whereas it kind of a find and replace will just carry on creating malforming and all sorts of stuff. I've definitely broken things maybe I shouldn't have done with a very creative find and replace in the past. Does it make any mistakes? Yes, it did make 1 or 2 mistakes. It misinterprets some of the properties and stuff. That's partially to do some logic we didn't think of. Thankfully, they were picked up by unit tests, but it is a risk that you have to think about, especially, when I created a pull request and I asked one of the colleagues, can you review this 100,000 line change? He was like, yeah, that was the quickest review ever. I don't think he actually looked at every single line, but maybe he did. And, how long did it take to write? It's one of these things where you're like, okay, well, maybe, does it take longer to create the tool than it is to actually make the change? And it's always the balance. So in this particular case, it took me 2 days to do, but I think it's a bit unrealistic because I'm already quite familiar with AST stuff. So if you're learning that, it possibly take a week and you start equaling to the time it takes just do it manually. So it's something you always need to keep in mind. I guess you want just really kind of calculate how big is your code base, how big's the chain, how many find the usages of to really warrant doing this stuff. And so these are big factors you really want to think about when you're doing creating these tools. As much as they're cool, as much as a developer, I like a good challenge to do. It's just things you want to think about. But ultimately, it's still very complicated. I showed you that code. I know we ran it very quickly, but it is more on the advanced scale stuff, and it's not something that all levels of programmers will be able to pick up immediately. So, yeah. So I don't want to end the talk on a bit of a low note, really. So I guess it's 2024. It's the year of AI. Everything's going to do it. AI is going to solve every our problems. It's going to take all our jobs. I've completely tackled this at the wrong approach. I couldn't create this tool. I've gone down a rabbit hole, created a tool. What I should have done is just let's ask ChatGPT just to do it all for us. They said they could take our job, so that's what I do. So I put a prompt in. Hey, can you convert this code over to use the new Angular Jet? So here is my input. This is what I gave to ChatGPT, and drum roll, please. Ta-da! Yes, it did it. Annoyingly, it kept the constructor in and put a comment in, but I think it's one of those things. Maybe with the right prompt, I can fix that. But yeah, it looks like it does work. So there you go. So, talk over. That's the solution. Success. Look, we've got the product manager happy. I'm happy. I'm not doing any of the work, and then the AI's doing it. I don't know what that code is, what language that is, but yeah. But hang on. I guess, yeah. The next step is we just need to move the entire code base in. Right, okay, so get the entire code base, millions of lines of code all straight into the cloud. There's definitely no problems with that, right? Well, so the first thing, obviously, code is often intellectual property. It's the property of the company. You can't just be posting that everywhere. And so when you're using something like an AI stuff, like ChatGPT is free, or at least on the free tiers are. When something is free, you are the product, and so all the info that you're putting into it, they are using to train the AI to get better. And so it's still very early days on what that actually means, but there has been horror stories and rumors that people have posted, put sensitive information into some of these language models. I'm not saying ChatGPT specifically does this, but has been cases. And then other people have asked queries, and then they got the results back. So, for example, maybe I put all our secret source for our finance calculations in, and someone asks, can you create a finance calculator? And maybe they get our secret source. Who knows? I'm not saying that is the case, but it is definitely a risk that we want to think about. And especially when you've got products that are free, you do have to think, what the benefit are they getting out of this? And the other thing is cost. You can have a few prompts a minute, a few prompts an hour with ChatGPT, and when you start working out how many requests you need to do, especially if you're doing the whole code base, it gets really expensive very quickly, and that's why there's a lot of money into AI. I've seen Nvidia's stock lately and stuff. And then the other thing is that they're not that quick. If you just think how many files that we have in our code base. It would have taken, I worked it out roughly, it would take like 2 or 3 days to run through it. It's still quick, but ultimately it's not compared to 1 minute, which is what our tool to run. So there's a bit of balance, and I don't know if I trust them that well. Often they like to make up things, and it's a difficult one, really. So the other thing as well is there's a character limiter. So a lot of these have a character limiter. This is the how much you can give them before they kind of get overwhelmed. So I know this might be incorrect that they change the character limiter all the time, but essentially if you have, let's say, a huge file with over 5,000 lines of code or something, you'd have to split that up into chunks, and then you have the real challenge of like marrying the chunks back together without causing all sorts of bugs. It can be done. I have a little play with it, but it does cause all sorts of weird, wonderful things. It likes to finish the line endings for you or make stuff up. It's not helpful. But yeah, it's something to kind of factor in. A lot of these things do have how much line they can process. So what about running it locally? Okay, maybe the cloud's not right for us. We've got a huge code base. We can just, we'll do it in-house, Just a very quick thing. What is LM model? I don't know if you're up to date with everything. So large language model, essentially, it's a type of intelligence that's designed to understand and generate text, human text. So there's obviously different types of AI, but this is specifically around kind of text prediction. I like to think of it as a fancy prediction engine. All it is, if you really dumb it down, it creates a word and it just has a high prediction for the next word in the sentence. It's not sentient. It's not. All it's doing is essentially it's trying to translate your text into an answer, and then it's just doing kind of essentially a very probability stuff, but obviously it's using machine learning and all the weird and wonderful stuff. I'm not going into full detail tonight, but yeah, that's a very kind of basic overview of how that works. So, maybe you can load up Facebook's Llama 2. It's quite a popular one. You can do it. It's open source as well, or maybe you want to use Apple's. I can't remember what Apple's is called, but they are trying it out. I believe that is open source, and there's a few other open source available, but I think Llama 2 seems to be the go-to at the moment in terms of you want to try it locally on your machine, and you can literally just download this and set it up. It is a bit of a faff, but it is definitely something you can do. It does have high PC requirements. And so this is where, why GPUs are skyrocketing in price recently. So they recommend at least 24 gigs of VRAM. So that's the video RAM on your graphics card. That's not your RAM on your computer. And so all of it's processed by essentially by the GPU. And because you're loading these huge data sets, essentially, it needs all that VRAM to fit on it. And really, that's quite a small data set. We're talking some options. If you go into the server, they're talking about terabytes of VRAM. They've got all sorts of crazy stuff. So if you are doing this locally, you really want to invest a lot of money. So, average gaming GPUs, which, already take, 500 quid or something for a GPU, a graphics card these days. You're talking about 8 gigs and stuff, so it's not quite there. You can do it if you have a really small data set, have a little play around locally. But I think, yes, obviously they're improving this all the time, creating optimizations. So this is current state of AI and stuff at the moment. And then having a good data set is really key, really. You need to, most of the secret sauce is having the right data and training on the right stuff. So, so for example, in our use case, we want to properly train on GitHub, all the different GitHub issues that have been created, Stack Overflow, maybe someone's got an answer for that, Medium articles, dev blocks, and particularly the Angular docs. So we need to make sure that our data set has that. If you just download a preset data set from online, a lot of the data sets probably won't have any of this, or maybe you have like just 1 or 2 GitHub issues. So a lot of this, what you're paying for the cloud providers is, ChatGPT have scraped the entire internet as their data set, and that's where all the power comes into it. And then there's also kind of time it takes to train these AIs as well, these models, and fine tune them. So if you're doing that yourself, there's going to be a lot of work. There's definitely a lot of art, and I think things are getting progressive, or things are progressing very rapidly at the moment. So things are changing, but it is possible to do it. It's just a bit of a learning curve. But I think possibly, maybe in a year's time or 2, it might be too quick. So I don't know. It's something to keep an eye on. And then I guess another option is using pre-trained AI models, which are available. But again, someone has to have done all that work, and they're not going to give it to you for free, are they? I don't know. So yeah, and then also making sure those models are up to date. So we want, that if I'm doing an upgrade for Angular, let's say 17, I need to make sure that the model has information for the latest Angular 17 syntax. Otherwise, it's not going to know. If it's data from, let's say, 2015 or something, it's not going to know what I'm talking about. So maybe AI is not the right way of doing it. Okay, so we worked out there's quite a lot of problems of just getting AI to just do the thing. Well, maybe we can look at this a bit more cleverly. Okay, so could we get AI to write the tool? So we had that tool that we wrote, and it took us a little while to do, and you had to learn it. Can we speed that up? Could we just get AI to write the tool? And that's basically what I did. And so it's really quite simple. So I created a prompt. I said, "Hey, can you write me a program, a Node.js program that transforms this code into this?" I gave it a bit of an example. And what I'm going to do, I think it'd just be easier, is just to show you that. 2 seconds, because I've lost the tab. Just give me a second. I should have. Scroll to the top. So, can everyone see? Can I zoom? What is the zoom button on a Mac? Shout it out if anyone knows it, because I'm not a Mac user.
Just hold it a bit closer.
Okay, so yeah, pretty much this is my the thing prompt that I originally put in. So I just said, "Hey, can you transform this code from here into this?" So I didn't even actually ask it to do what I wanted. I just said, "Transform this code into this code," and pretty much that's it. It went straight in and it created that immediately. Like, that is several seconds of work, perfect. And in this case, it's using the old way of using TypeScript, so it's not using TsMorph, and it created something, and I just ran it and it worked perfectly. No. Anyone's used AI to do any stuff, it doesn't work perfectly. So a technique I always try to do is refining it. So the big key thing what we like about ChatGPT, the reason why it's kind of game changing, is that the context space, you're able to iterate on the prompts. So the next thing I said, can you use async await? I don't like the callback system that you created. It's quite an old way of doing code. I want it to be modern code, so I should have specified, can you do it with the latest version of Node, because it's a bit easier to read. Can you make sure you're using TypeScript version 5 as well, because it was creating it all for TypeScript version 3, and I was like, hang on, those APIs don't even exist, because hey, this update class declaration doesn't exist. And so a key factor of this working well is having some sort of base knowledge of this. So I already had some knowledge around TypeScript, and so yes, I could have written this myself, I could have spent the day doing it, but instead I got the AI to do it. But I guess the advantage for me, as someone who's had experience with this, is that I knew where it could go wrong and I could read and understand it. So that is one of the kind of the requirements of this. But it was able for me to do this really quickly. All I did have to do was read it over and go, oh, hang on, that's not right. Or I just ran it and just saw the error message. So often an approach I often do is I just give it the error message I give and say, please fix. And then that is pretty much my prompt. And so again, it just fixed the error they asked it for. And then again, I said, hey, this method can this doesn't exist. You've hallucinated it. So the thing it likes to do, it's very good at predicting stuff, and it's very good at predicting stuff that looks like it's right. But in this case, it's just made something up that's completely fabricated. It doesn't exist. It's not in the API spec at all. But if you were to read that, it looks, oh, that's very convincing. Yeah, create transform context. Yeah, I think that's right. But again, it's one of these things where you have to have a little bit of base knowledge around. And this is one of those dangers where we've got junior developers who are like, oh, I'm going to use AI to do this and stuff like that. I think you have to be careful with it because it's like, it does a lot of stuff that you probably don't know. And because you haven't learned that, especially as someone new to code, you often develop either bad practices or things that you probably spent hours going down a rabbit hole debugging that aren't an issue. And so here is the code. It's a nice little trick is you can just say, can you just reply with the changes it needs? Otherwise, it does the whole thing again, and it's quite slow. And then so it's pretty much a conversation, a bit like when you're pair programming, if you're doing any of that, it's just like, hey, can you change this? Can you change that? And that's how I used ChatGPT in this case to create that tool. And I was able to do this tool in about, I don't know, half an hour. The whole thing done, and it was quite quick. Obviously, as I said, I've had a bit more experience with this. I've done this before, so it might take someone a bit longer. And what's quite good as well, ChatGPT or any of these love to talk. They'll talk their heads off. So if you're struggling to understand the code, it does love to create little comments and stuff. So you can just say, can you explain to me what this line of code does? Obviously, pinch a bit of paint. Sometimes it will make up what it thinks it's doing, but it does help break down some of these problems. And pretty much, I say, I've written some code. I was like, oh, can you put this logic in, and then put that in, and I evolved. And at some point, it was like, oh, this white space, you're not transforming the white spaces back out. Can you deal with that? And so, okay, yes. So it explains to me the white space problem, and it does that. And then at some point I say, can you switch to TS Morph? Sorry, I did talk about, so then it's switched to TS Morph, and then it's automatically converted that to the TS Morph variant, and that is pretty much closely the code that I showed you earlier, with a few refinements. It's just a really powerful way of just being able to kind of speed up in the process of creating these tools. And I guess really for me, it's making an actual viable solution, whereas before it's a big risk of spending all this time creating the tool, and he's like, oh, maybe is it really having the value that we to the business of me spending a week out doing this very small injection thing? But if I'm able to do this in half an hour and get those really quick wins, it's really powerful, and it helps maintain and keep on top of the garden of Codebase essentially. I'm going to find the tab where we were. Sorry. I do write my own presentation software, which is fun and buggy. Cool. So that was there. And so I just want to recap some common pitfalls that you probably have when having a play around with AI stuff. And I really encourage you having a play. So the first one is don't give up on the first try. I know loads of people, I've tried AI, it's rubbish, it doesn't do what I want. It's like, what did you do? Oh, I just said, can you solve world hunger? And then that was like, you need to work with it. It's that refining process. You saw in that chat quite a long thread, it's that refining process of it. And you eventually do get the result that you want. It does take a little bit of work. It's not just one prompt wonder. I know that, there's some prompt masters out there. If you go on the internet, there's some tips and tricks you can learn. I recommend it's quite a good Reddit, to be honest. I read a lot of Reddit on the AI stuff. People do lots of different recommendations for like prompts and hacks you can do. Ultimately, it's just refining is the main key that a lot of people are missing. I think you can really get some value out of this if you just give it a try. Sometimes AI gets stuck. It goes round in circles, keeps making the same mistakes. It's really frustrating, especially when you've got a long thread. So kind of the opposite to the refined thing, sometimes you just have to go, okay, step back, start again. So often I create a new thread and I kind of explain it where we are progressed in the timeline, and suddenly it's just new seed or it's getting too caught up on a thing that you said previously, it then solves the problem. You could be able to progress further. So definitely a trick is starting a new thread. People just have one continuously long thread can just cause some weird behaviors. And then hallucinations, a big thing really, and that's what the difference between the earlier versions of, let's say, ChatGPT or even Bard. There's a big difference between, if anyone you ever used Bard when it first came out, to Gemini, which has been renamed to. The reason why I prefer using ChatGPT is that it's a lot more accurate and less hallucinations. Google's Gemini and Bard was hooked up to the internet. It was really cool. We had a lot of newer update. The data set was a lot newer, and we were able to search recent events, but it kept making things up that just didn't exist, and it was very frustrating. Whereas I felt the newer versions of ChatGPT, especially 4, is a lot more accurate, and it's not creative. If you've used the Bing version, which is essentially a special fork of ChatGPT because it's all owned by Microsoft, you can choose between accuracy and creativity. You've seen the little slider, and so that helps with some of the hallucinations and stuff. Obviously, if you're writing a novel or something, some book or some sort of creative piece, then hallucinations are really good. But if you're writing code in this particular case, we want it to kind of be accurate. So just watch out for that. It's something you always need to be careful with. We saw that in the prompt when it kept making APIs that made up. And then kind of out-of-date information, again, this is the same for why I have a lot of juniors that they'll use this tool and they'll be like, oh, this is how you look up an element in the DOM or something. You're like, I haven't seen this antiquated code for at least 10 years. Where do you get this from? And because obviously ChatGPT scraped the entire internet, it might have somehow decided one day to write code that you'd write in the 90s, and that's not how you do it in 2024. So it's good to specify what version of something you're using or what year range. I think that's a good kind of trick to look for. And then, again, I guess about newer data models and sets, I think I covered that before. And then just always review what it's done. It's very, you don't want to give it the entire code base or a huge amount of data and just go, run wild. I think there's always a bit of a trust with this, and it can do stuff that you're not expecting. These tools are always improving and stuff, so it's probably going to get less and less of a problem, but it's something to always watch out for. And I think for me, if you're using this to improve your workflow or to speed up some of these things, it does help to have at least a base understanding of some of the stuff that you're doing. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for my talk. I think really just want to wrap up at the value of able to essentially do these changes a lot quicker, a lot more efficiently, and it for me is be able to improve the garden without creating these huge business cases where I want to spend 2 weeks to refactor this, and having AI to be able to be able to increase the time to do these changes, reduce the time it takes to do this, is really beneficial, and I'm really excited for the future of some of that stuff. Thank you again for very much listening. I guess I've got some. I guess I'll take questions because I'm sure you're all eager.
I've got one. Who does your code reviews? Is it somebody who's in a mental asylum now? Because they're doing 4,000, I think.
So with the code transformations and stuff, because you do create horrendous pull requests. I think I often try and break it down. So in some code, you probably see I specify a folder or something. So what I did is I'd either do it per application. So we are multi-application based, or maybe even just per page or folder is a good way of breaking it down. It depends on the change, obviously. Some changes might not allow for that, but that's a way to break it down and reduce the risk. I don't want that massive change going live straight away. We practice continuous delivery at Codeweavers, so we're deploying multiple times a day. So for us, it's a lot easier to break those down into smaller chunks. So when those chunks go to live and something breaks, we can immediately know, okay, it's only between those lines of code that have broken it. But I think for me, I think if you are doing some of this stuff, I think it does help to have a good base on unit tests, E2E tests, all that stuff. It allows you to make these refactors a lot more safely, and after you can be able to sleep at night, I think. Any other questions? Any questions? Oh, yeah, Elliot.
Hi. So when you were talking about the abstract syntax tree, TS Morph, etc., when I've done it in the past, I did it around sort of linting and creating like custom linting rules. The only caveat that we had was that it was quite dependent on the type of TypeScript version that you were using. So even when you were talking about ChatGPT, difference between 3 and 5 meant that you could use some methods or not. So do you feel like perhaps in the near future you might have to update that script or maintain that script per TypeScript version, or do you feel like maybe that's something AI could even do and help you out with?
Yeah, great question. I think, I guess it's one of these things where these tools, yes, you probably end up writing some horrendous code possibly in some of these, but it doesn't really matter too much because they're not part of the garden. These are just a ways to be able to do work on the garden, and often you throw it away. We're not going to be running that script ever again because we've done the work. So it's something we don't need to worry about maintaining as much. But yes, I think using AI will be a perfect example. Hey, I've got this using TypeScript version 5, TypeScript version 6 come out, and I need to support it because you are right, it is dependent on the version of TypeScript. Then yeah, I'd love to see what AI gives you. I think ChatGPT will probably do, as I said, as with everything, it'll give you 90% of the way there, and you just need to fix the 10%. Yes.
Would you
Greg.
consider using something like that on a more permanent basis to stop regressions? Like, as in a new person starts and they do it in the constructor syntax rather than inject. Like, I know in the PHP world there's a tool called Rector, which is about sort of like refactoring stuff from usually like when new syntax comes out you can run it, but you can also do it on like a PR basis and like GitHub Actions. So it would check for someone using the old one and then basically make like another PR to go, oh, here's the corrected version. Like, would you consider like the things that ChatGPT is creating? Would you try and like factor that in?
Yeah, I think that would be something really interesting to explore. I think anyone who's familiar with the Angular ecosystem, they have something called Angular migrations, which is essentially using TS Morph under the hood. And when you upgrade to the newer version of Angular, they do these transformations. That's how they're able to update all your code. But they don't. They try and do it. It's pretty basic, so they haven't created one for the inject ones. We wanted to do that. I couldn't find one available, so we created one very quickly, and that's what sparked this talk. I think, as Elliot said, linting will be essentially, a lot of these will be using some sort of abstract tree syntax to be able to parse that, and so you could integrate it into the linting that says, if you're doing the old way, flag it up, fail the build or something, and you could have a quick fix. If you use something like ESLint before, a lot of these have like quick fixes that will auto fix it for you. I think probably more valuable to have that open source and get other developers doing that for that type of thing. I don't think it's probably worth the investment in time for it. I think I'd probably just, at the very least, just make it fail the build. I wouldn't spend too long.
I'm kind of trying to get my head around who should be doing what here.
Okay, yeah.
In a different field, I use CAD software, and when a new version comes out and they make changes to the interface, the new version always lets you import the old version and output the new one. And it was more widespread. When a manufacturer made a change, they would give you the tool to convert your old code into the new code. It makes a lot of sense because they've already got the parser for the old code and they've debugged it. So why are we letting them get away with imposing changes on us without giving us the tools to convert our code?
Yeah, I think again, it's if you're in the Angular ecosystem, like Angular Migrate is that scheme. But obviously, as developers, we're technical, and we often have very bespoke and custom different ways of doing work, and we all work very slightly differently. And so some of these things are just not going to be applicable for us, or not compatible with our way of working. And so I guess there's always a value of us having to be able to write these tools and do it ourselves for the custom stuff that we created. I think I'd still disagree with that because there's plenty of software where I've maybe I think can't remember, it was some version of like Photoshop, was it Adobe or something? And I had this project, I just couldn't convert. It crashed every time, and so you're always a bit on the whim with some of that stuff, or even switching from one CAD software to another bit of CAD software. They don't always support each other.
No.
I guess an example of that,
And quite deliberate.
yes.
Lock you in. Yes.
and that's actually a few years ago we actually used TS Morph to convert our Angular JS code into the newer Angular 2 Plus stuff. It sort of worked. I think with the AI stuff it would have worked a lot better, but some things you can do between actually switching between different frameworks. Cool. Any other questions?
I'll dumb it down a bit, but is it easy, like you're saying, you have to go to your product person or whoever to say it's going to take 3 weeks to do X? I'm obviously going to say no. But like, is it easier if you say, "No, I'm going to use AI to do it"? Because it's cool, and would they be more like, "Yeah, okay, give it a go"?
I don't know. I'd have to ask, I guess. I think probably not. I think this would scare them off, to be honest. I think it's just more, it was, we were able to compress that, 3 weeks, which is a lot of work. There's, a lot of money in terms of the business and stuff, to what is essentially half an hour. I was able to do it really quickly. And it was just like, wow. That was just eye-opening for me. It was just like, look how much kind of stuff I could do. And I had loads of ideas. I'm going to do this, the stuff that I've been wanting to do, but I just couldn't really justify it. So that's quite, yeah.
Kind of on that line, you talked about new developers a lot, and you had a lot of really good tips about getting what you want out of ChatGPT. But do you have any tips for what makes a good candidate, like task candidate for AI to help you?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think honestly, I'm just one of these people like, let's just try it and see how it goes. I don't think I've thought that far, to be honest. I think, I just try it and see if it, you tell me if it works or not for whatever crazy idea you come up with. I think that's quite exciting, really, is just trying to learn the boundaries for it. But I guess there's definitely little tips and tricks you can learn on the way to be able to achieve some of this stuff more effectively.
So it's not like in daily development, you should try to avoid using it for every line of code. But is there a sort of a particular time where you're like, this is particularly is a good task
I think
for ChatGPT?
I think this is a great example for why I found it quite effective. I think a lot of people are trying out some GitHub Copilot, which is just auto prediction stuff. It's quite sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's annoying. So I think that's a great way of, I guess, using AI and just speeding up some of the monotonous of writing some of the boilerplate often when you're creating components and stuff, like day-to-day code. So I think that's an effective way. Sorry, that's not a very good answer.
The only thoughts on this at the risk of sounding like a grumpy old man, like erosion of I don't know how to articulate it. You mentioned that like vetting ChatGPT is extremely important.
Yeah.
If you sort of train yourself up relying on this coach that you always have by your side to sort of teach you and help you through, you can never check, like, so you can't sense check.
No, I get what you mean. I think every like new technological phase, everyone has that discussion. It's like, back in my day we used to write ones and zeros. These high level programming languages are going to cause all sorts of things. You need to understand what it's doing under the hood. Otherwise, you might run into some memory problem. And how are you going to possibly debug it if you only know JavaScript and stuff? So you could argue that. And I think at a point, the tooling will get refined enough where you can essentially just be prompts. Maybe, I don't know. It's very exciting. Things are moving very quickly at the moment. So we might see a world where we are having essentially another higher level of programming language that is all AI based. I think the problem we're tackling at the moment is just the randomness of it. It's not very predictable. It does go off the rails a bit, and it's not often just the same thing every time. So I think that's probably the challenge thing that's being worked out. I don't know if we're really going to get there. Personally, I think it's too magic. But I like to be proven wrong.
I feel like the hallucination is what
Yes.
from the abstraction of
Yeah.
higher level
Yeah.
languages, right? Like that's the new problem
Mhm.
that is unique to this particular
Yeah.
tool, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, Kathy.
I would say, but is it unique? Because the way I like to think about it is what it's doing is summarizing in a user-friendly form the stuff that you found on Stack Overflow and various searches and so on, and you still had to filter out what are the things that aren't relevant and which code is right and how does it fit into that program. So hopefully it's the same kind of skills that they already have.
Yeah, critical. Yeah, just critically assessing what you're being given and figuring out if it's true. Yeah, I guess so.
That's going to be harder, like you say, to keep those skills up to date if you're sort of relying on the tool, but then you still need to do it in order to, you still need to keep those skills.
The problems get worse the more obscure the programming languages as well. Like I was trying to, I say obscure, but I was using it to tell me it was some C programming, and it was just garbage. He was hallucinating stuff all the time. Just didn't seem to understand anything. Like JavaScript, it does it really well. PHP, okay, but the less popular or less mainstream, it just gets really bad.
Yeah, it's your data set really. JavaScript's an easy one to do just because there's so people. It's such a heavily used and so many posts on Stack Overflow and all this stuff. There is obviously a big question now. It's like, well, if everyone stops using Stack Overflow and stops using GitHub issues and stuff, and everyone's relying on AI, where's the new data for the AI to improve on? If everyone's just going to regurgitate the same stuff, yeah, Elliot.
All right, is it okay to ask another question?
Yeah.
So we're talking a bit about, obviously, ChatGPT AI, and in the example you have here, it's kind of like a one-to-one, right? Via, instead of using constructor, using the inject. So when it comes to something like maybe a new approach, so like with new Angular, we've got signals,
Yeah.
a different way of actually holding state and changing state. Do you feel like AI actually might be a good way of also migrating it, or do you feel like that's like a step too far because it's a complete change between the old way of doing it and the new way, if that makes sense?
I think my answer is I don't know enough about signals. I think what I'd probably do is I'd do the same approach that I did for this talk, but I'd probably limit it. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to do simple components. How you declare that, I don't know, but I'd probably just be like, right, all the CRUD components, all the simple input and output ones, yeah, switch them all to use signals, and it's probably easy to do, and that might get you 40% away, depends on your code base really, and I'll do the stuff that's a bit more complicated, higher risk base. Manually. One that I will probably do that's coming up is the switching from the subscriptions with the RxJS, if anyone's familiar with that, to use the taken until. That's quite a good one that we want to use the tool for, because it's just, littered everywhere in the code base. It's just a slightly different syntax way of doing the same thing. It's just that's a new best practice. So, yeah. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone.